good vibrations.
Welcome to episode 191. And lately this series has been all about resisting tyranny, injustice, and assaults on our natural rights and freedoms through self-empowerment, or people power, if you like. And we're continuing in that spirit today as I'm joined by David Adelman, better known as the People's Lawyer. Welcome on, David.
Thank you very much, Mark. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be on, because I've known you much longer than you've known me. So it's nice to join you on the platform, as it were.
Well, that's very kind. It really seems like I've made a major impact in the last year, which I never expected to happen. I've been on this path for 11 years, putting out alternative information, mainly about the true nature of the corporate music industry. But when the scamdemic kicked off, I just felt that personal responsibility and obligation to creation to get involved in sharing empowering information and just trying to resist what's being done to us. And that kind of motivates me every day. And I'm very gratified to hear that I'm making an impact, and lots of people have discovered my work in the last year that didn't know about me before. So it's very humbling to hear that.
Well, yes, I saw you at a meeting in Leeds about, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. I think we've all lost track of time, so it could have been 20 years ago.
That would have been Real Change, I think, the Real Change group in Leeds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And on the subject of what's happened in the last year, what I say in my talks is that this has been the best year that I've had on the planet so far, and by a long way, by a million miles, actually, because with due deference to people who have struggled for mental health, who've lost their jobs, who've lost all kinds of things, and I'm not putting any of that down or denigrating it or marginalizing it. I'm speaking very personally that this has been the year in which I found my true life purpose, which is to get out there and help awaken people to who they are at law and what they can do about it in real practical terms.
Yeah, it's very refreshing to hear that, because I feel the same way about my work. You know, this is what I came here for, and I'm on my right path now, as you are, and so many other people doing great work out there. And it seems we needed this situation to kind of shake us up a bit and give us a kick up the arse and get us to where we needed to be. It hasn't always felt like that along the path. It's been a difficult one to tread, but we're right where we need to be, doing what we need to do, all of us making individual contributions now. And when you put all those contributions together collectively, we are a force to be reckoned with.
Well, we certainly are. I mean, I would say I've made more friends in the last 14 months than I have had in the previous 60 years.
Me too, yeah. Well, not 60 years, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't deny my age. It's just my chronological age. Biologically, I'm a lot younger, but that's another day's work. It's been inspirational. What I would say about this whole experience is basically it's an IQ test. The main I would say the main basis of the test is more spiritual. It's a test of spiritual intelligence and common sense rather than anything else. And those of us who've got common sense and a bit of spiritual intelligence are having a whale of a time is probably overstating it, but we're in our element, whereas a lot of people without that common sense or spiritual intelligence are really, really struggling. And you can't crack jokes in front of them. They have a very dark look in their face. And we can only feel a bit of compassion for them, because they're in the mire. And there's no obvious way out for them right now.
A lot of people seem to have been failing the common sense test these past few months. They've just been behaving in ridiculous, absurd, infantile ways. And it just amazes me that it's been so easy to coerce people into these behaviors that defy all common sense, all logic, all dignity, all self-respect. It's very disappointing.
Well, I have several comments to make on that. There's an American psychiatrist says that in order for him to stay sane, he has to imagine that the entire world, well, he actually said his entire town, but I've extrapolated it to the Western world, can't speak for the Eastern world right now, that the entire world, or the world that we know, has gone insane. We're living in one humongous lunatic asylum. And so he treats everyone as loonies until they prove otherwise. And I think that that's actually quite a sensible, common sense approach. It really is that dire. And one little analogy that I draw is you imagine a stage hypnotist that has taken you as a subject for hypnosis and has told you in trance that there is no longer a number 4. Number 4 does not exist. You will not hear it, see it, or calculate it. And when you come out of trance, he asks you to count in front of the audience using your fingers from 1 to 10. And you go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And at the point that you say 9, you realize you've got 2 fingers left to count. That's when you go into a bit of cognitive dissonance. And that's what happens to the general masses when the likes of you and me, Mark, present them with the truth. They're at finger number 9 and they get stuck there and they go back to 1. What I'm asking people, and this is just a request at the moment, is how can we get them past finger number 9 and to get them to admit, oh, crikey, there's something missing from my counting. I wonder what that must be. So this is the conundrum for us to bring the sleeping, hypnotized masses on board. We've got to get them to count number 9 as number 9 and not as number 10.
Indeed. Yeah, that's our job. Good analogy. Let's get down to business then. Just a brief bit of background to set the scene. You're a real lawyer?
Yeah. Apologies to all those people that hate lawyers, and I don't blame you because I count myself amongst them. Yes, I qualified as a solicitor back in the day. But soon quit, which is my personal badge of honor, because I could see, even in my 20s, I could see it, because I follow my heart and I follow my gut, and I could see that it was all wrong. I mean, I couldn't put my finger on how wrong it was or how the wrong had come about, but it wasn't for me. So I took the qualification and legged it, and I went on the road basically and just delivered parcels and ended up, my next major episode was to educate, and that was my next step.
And at what point did you come to realize that this is a world of deception and that nothing is what it seems, and the job of the government and the mainstream media is to lie to us? Can you put a single point on it where you came to these realizations?
Well, I'd never really bought into what you could call the mainstream 3D reality. I'd always kept a respectful distance from it, not having done enough research to undermine it completely. But I would say if there was an epiphanous or pivotal moment, it was at a meeting in 2013, which was convened by myself, actually, because long story short, I'd been funded to go to schools to teach a card game. And that funding had been basically diverted away from me. Half of it was. So that gave me the idea that there's corruption in the system. So that half woke me up and led me to convene this meeting for progressive educators. And we were going to look into ways of educating children above and beyond the schooling system. And at that meeting was a friend of mine who was a keyboard in a choir that I was singing in. And he was ahead of me in terms of lawful awareness. And he mentioned the word straw man. And he said, David, you need to look up. He could sense that I was disillusioned and looking for answers to the conundrums about, what is this corruption and what's going on? And he said, you need to look up the word straw man. And I said to him, well, I do remember that word from my law school and my law degree. He said, yes, but this will be a different context. So I went home and found myself watching The Nature of the Cage. And that was really that was the start of my lawful self-education, my awakening as a new lawman, as a man that was aware of how legalese law was upside down, and we had been turned on our heads and made into puppets without our realizing it. And we're all living our lives stood on our heads instead of walking on our feet. So that led me to all kinds of other research, including education research. And it led me to write a book, School No Place for Children, and then that got the attention of the Glastonbury Symposium. I don't know whether I've gone too far in the answer to this question, but basically I'm coming around to how I became the people's lawyer. So, sure. Yeah. I was invited to do the Glastonbury Symposium as an educator, talking about the book School No Place for Children. And it went very well. And that was 2019, July. And I was just about to embark on a nationwide tour as the nation's wannabe educator when Hovis hit. And I use the word Hovis because if you use the word, you know what I mean, CV and all that. Exactly. CV 19. You can get all kinds of, yeah. So for me, it's Hovis. Hovis hit. And then I realized, hang on a minute, people don't just need an education about schooling. They need an education about life and about law. So I put my lawful self-educator hat on and embarked on rallies and talks and but I still hadn't invented this people's lawyer. That happened in November 2020 when I was on the promenade at Morecambe, and I said to the assembled, some of you may know me, some of you may not, and I am. And I was about to say my full name. I thought, hang on a minute, they don't need my name. So I need to give them something else. So I just, out top of my head, I said, the people's lawyer. Because unconsciously I realized that A, I am for the people, and B, I am a bona fide lawyer. So it was not a trade description issue or a pretentious issue. And that people's lawyer has now got various platforms and is becoming an entity in itself, which is driven by me, because it's just an idea, a trademark, if you like. And I'm the man behind it.
Okay. So everything is illusory. Money, police powers and such, law, so-called. And many of my audience will already comprehend this because it tends to be awake and aware types that listen to this. And many people are coming to understand the Admiralty law system and how fraudulent that is and how our parents are tricked into making us corporate entities through the birth certificate fraud. But it's one thing for the people to understand these empowering truths. But if police officers and government policy enforcers that they might come up against don't have these comprehensions and they still have this belief in illusory laws, then we've got a real problem, haven't we? Because we've got to get these types of people on board with us. Otherwise, they're just going to be enforcing injustice and tyranny and thinking that they've got a right to do it. It's a real problem that so many of these types don't have the understandings that the likes of us do.
It is a real problem. It's the equivalent in the medical profession of thinking that prescription drugs and injections are the solution to either a real or an illusory problem. And the education system, in a very loose sense, I don't just mean schooling, I'm including law schools, medical schools, accountancy, colleges, everything, are indoctrinating people with awfully upside down knowledge. Well, knowledge is a euphemism. I mean, it's not even knowledge. It's just, it's nonsense. And so, yes, we do have a real problem. I do know some free-thinking, freedom-friendly police, mainly retired police, which is a pity, because the current crop tend to have to leave because they get bullied and they have to leave. So it's very difficult to get police officers who are still operating on board. You know, they either have to retire first and then they come on board. So I am going around the country attracting lawyers, doctors, not in huge numbers, but there's a trickle at the moment, but hopefully that trickle will become a deluge in the not too distant future. And then you get the 100 monkey syndrome kicking in. And I would like to say that by the end of the year, I'm hopeful that a substantial number of doctors and lawyers will have either been directly or indirectly exposed to what I'm teaching and will have taken on board this lawful correction, if you like. It's a lawful correction of status. It's an insertion of truth. And it's an antidote to the lies and corruption that are basically poisoning people's minds and killing or maiming their bodies.
Well, it's very encouraging to hear that you feel we're close to that 100th monkey tipping point, because I feel we're getting there as well. You know, not fast enough for my liking, but we've got to be close to it. It's got to happen at some point.
Well, on a positive note, when I first did the rallies in Manchester, I had nine women, 2 men and a dog. and a lot of bemused hecklers and people looking on like, what you did? You're talking nonsense. You're dangerous. This is back in, I would say June, July, summertime of last year.
Yeah.
But in recent times in Manchester and elsewhere, we've had hundreds on the streets and sometimes even thousands. And I don't know if you know, but last Saturday, I wasn't there. I was actually taking a well-known rest in Wales. The crowd, the assembled crowd of maybe certainly 4 figures, marched by surprise into the Arndale Centre. So that took the police and everyone by surprise. So we do have the numbers now, and they are getting creative. They also marched on the BBC in Salford Keys.
Yeah,
so we are getting. You got to bless the Mancunians. You got to love them. We are getting the numbers now. I mean, London recently had possibly 500,000 on the streets. Not on the
bit more.
Not
I think.
on the. Yeah, not on the last one, but on the one before. And then April, on the 29th, when I hope to be, I will be there. There's expected to be 1 million plus. So things are happening. And as you say, okay, it could be quicker because it's like a race against time. They've got all this draconian, totalitarian, the new policing bill or the new definitions of extreme terrorism and dangerous extremism, and widening the pavement so people can pass each other 6 feet apart. And they're putting in all kinds of infrastructure for surveillance. So it's a race against time. It's very exciting because, there's no real worst case scenario, because if you've made enough friends, then you've got the community that you'll need to plant seeds, literally, grow your own food, and be out in these rural communities or semi-rural communities, living on the land, and let the smart cities just disappear up their own backside, basically.
Those 2 weeks to flatten the curve sure are dragging out.
Yeah, they certainly are. Yeah.
Yeah. I was at a London rally about a year ago, May 2020, in Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. And there must have been 40 people and a couple of dogs. It was pathetic. 40 people. And, by that point, I'd known right from day one that this whole thing was a scam and it was all about removing our rights and freedoms, but apparently only 39 other people at that point felt strongly enough to go out and protest about it. Contrast that with the London event that I was at on the 24th of April, where estimates are it was 750,000 or getting close to 1 million people. That's what's happened in the space of a year. And that has to be hugely encouraging. And the longer the tyranny gets dragged out and the more blatant and obvious it becomes, that's only going to grow exponentially.
Well, I agree, because as long as the growth keeps occurring, and it will, it's kind of got its own momentum now, and more and more people can see from the sidelines that you can't have that many extreme and dangerous terrorists. It's a nonsense. So this could be the sheer weight of numbers, could be that finger number 9. That is the key to the dehypnotizing and deprogramming of the masses. It's just the sheer volume and weight of numbers of people who are clearly ordinary people, not violent, not aggressive, simply there to make a point on behalf of humanity. And so there'll be a lot of head scratching, people knocking, for those who are prepared to turn their heads, but it's bound to get to, and it probably already has got to the point where we cannot be denied anymore. I know the BBC are going to deny us until their last breath, and it will be their last breath. They will be disbanded, and they'll be dispatched to the history books. But the people have this residual something that the BBC will never have, that will allow them to just pierce that veil of corruption and untruth and just say to themselves, hang on a minute, this many people can't be deluded. They must be making a point that I need to, excuse me, could you tell me what you're here for, please? And then you explain it to them, and then they go have something to think about,
The most common question I get asked in my correspondence is, what can I do to make a difference? People say to me, I feel so disempowered, so helpless. My family and friends don't get it. I feel like I'm fighting a lone battle here. What can I do? What can I contribute? What would you say to somebody making that kind of comment?
Well, people ask me all the time, the first thing to do is a negative. Do not be angry, do not be offensive, stay calm, and use unassailable facts and unassailable logic, and use the power of the question. Now, and also don't use too much energy, because if they're hypnotized, if they're programmed, most of what you say will go right over their heads. That's the finger number 9. They're not getting it. Now, if you're in a light-hearted mood, this is something that just occurred to me earlier today. What you could do is go round the back of them and postulate an even more extreme position and say, do you know what? I think it would be a good idea if they don't only lock us down, but if they lock us up so that we can never go out ever again, because we're clearly a danger to each other and to mankind. So I'd be quite happy. In fact, I tell you what, why don't they issue straitjackets to make sure that people can't even they can't do anything that would even resemble a normal gesture. You know, they can't hug or kiss or shake hands. In other words, you use extreme humor and just to make them think that you just might be making a point. And again, the idea is to get them thinking, you know, because if you just, I mean, I've seen this actually happen. It's happened to me. You can hold up the light newspaper with the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, and the government figures on it that show that the death stats for 2020 were no worse. In fact, they were actually better than 2019, 2018. 2017 was when there was a spike in deaths generally. You can hold it up in black and white, and the brainwashed masses will just say, where'd you get that from? And you say, well, these are the government statistics. And they'll say, oh, no, you've just got it you've just Googled it, mate. So it's a tough job, and it requires a lot of compassion and humor and patience, above all patience. I think I've probably only woken up, oh, gosh, I was going to say I could count the fingers, except that I'm probably half hypnotized, so I can't count to 9 properly. But I probably could count them on the fingers of 1, 2 hands at the most, directly woken people up. But they were ready to wake up. They were just, and they instigated the waking up process by asking me questions like, what's going on? Could you send me some info? So yes, use humor, be patient. In extreme cases, if you're dealing with authority, you can even find yourself threatened with being sectioned. People have been sectioned who start ranting about the truth. So no truth ranting, just keep it calm, keep it cool, keep it collected, and set a good, solid example of what rational living is all about, like the good old days. So just walk around, smile, shake hands with people. If you think that they feel threatened, remember that they have the mental state of a frightened 8 to 12-year-old. So they are in child infantilized mode. So you've got to ask yourself, how would you deal with a frightened child? You certainly wouldn't approach them. You would stand still or even back off and just reassure them. So it's reassuring them. Everything's okay. It's okay. Nothing bad is going to happen. And they may look like grown-ups, but I'm afraid for now, they certainly are not thinking and behaving like grown-ups. So treat them. This is tying up my 2 wills, law and education. Just treat them with kid gloves and as respectful as you can possibly be.
Yeah. Children in adults' bodies, it seems. And the controllers have set up this legal system where everything's illusory. You know, there's a corporate version of us as opposed to the flesh and blood living man or woman, because they can't really own the living man or woman, because we're aspects of the divine and we're born free and we're born with certain inherent rights and freedoms that come from the creator. So someone might claim ownership of us, but they never really do. So their whole system is just illusory and invalid. They seem to believe that they can own us or a version of us, but they never really do.
Well, I'm going to, again, marry the 2 wills of schooling and law. No, you're quite right. They operate on presumption, and most of us fall for this presumption because most of us went to school for way too long, where we were indoctrinated and where we had our thinking modified, and we were led to believe that we were the name on the birth certificate. And when your parents register your name, The government creates that name, and therefore the government owns that name, because the universal principle is whatever I create, I own. The school, being an agent of the government, then registers your name on their register of attendance, a register of who is at the school. And when a head teacher recently said to a mum, we own your child, the head teacher was actually quite right. At law, they do, because that child is a legal fiction represented by the legal name, and that school has taken registration of that name. When you take registration of everything, then the person registering is surrendering authority, legal title, and so they do own the child. But if the child knows that it's not a child but a boy or a girl, and if the parent knows that they're not a parent but a mum or a dad, everything changes. So it's all about, one of the things that I'm keen to do is to simplify things for people, because the first thing I say in my talks is I'm here to clarify, simplify, and uplift, because there's an awful lot of information out there, including some very well-meaning information that is actually way too complex, way too complicated. And we can simplify everything by saying, I am a man, she is a woman, this is a boy, this is a girl. And as you said quite rightly, Mark, in that status, in that state of divine beingness, we cannot be owned. We just cannot be owned. It's morally, spiritually, physically impossible, legally, on every level. But if you believe, if you have been led to believe that you are a person, and some genius recently said that person is simply an office. It's on the rung of hierarchy, on the government's hierarchical system. So the lowest rung is person. So if you have accepted the office of person, then you are in effect owned by the government, and the officers can deal with you according to the government rules and regulations known as statutes, acts, codes, conventions, etc. But if you know that that person is simply there for your benefit so that you can trade locally, nationally, and internationally, and that's an entire different talk to explain that more fully. And I do cover that a little bit in my talks, but more in courses that I run. If you know that you're not that person, but a man, woman, boy, or girl, then you can simply assert that knowledge using the power of the word. And as the Bible said, in the beginning was the word. So if the man, woman, boy, or girl knows who they are, knows how to verbalize that knowledge and rebut the presumption that they are a person and that person is owned, then they can literally step out of the water back onto the land. Because what's happened is the law of the sea has metaphorically flooded the land. And when people stand under common law, what they don't realize is that you can't, not in a court. You've already drowned at sea. Just by going to court, you've already drowned at sea, because the authorities have inundated the land with water. They are operating the law of the sea, commercial law, maritime law. And so you can now only stand on the land metaphorically in your own mind and assert that quietly outside of court. If you go into court, you're back in the public and they just laugh at you. So another way to look at it is that you're asserting cosmic, the law of space, and you're floating above. Maybe this is why they said in the Bible that Jesus walked on the water, because he had the knowledge to step above the Roman maritime law and float above it. It was a metaphor for knowing who you are and knowing how to assert that divine status.
Indeed. And there's a lot of word magic going on and deception through strategic use of language. You mentioned person there, and I think when you do the etymology on it, I think if you take it back to the original Latin, it translates as mask wearer. And the word child, I've heard you on one of your videos say that a child is like a legal fiction or an owned entity, as opposed to a boy or girl. So child is very different to, addressing somebody as a boy or a girl. And then words such as citizen and all these words that people think mean one thing, but they actually mean another to the psychopaths and the Satanists that run these systems.
They've given us, they've allotted to us all kinds of commercial statuses citizen, child, parent. Because remember, this is law of the sea, law of commerce. It's all commerce. Even Theresa May, as Prime Minister, recognized this when she said, we are governed and policed by consent. What she actually meant was, we are governed and policed by contract. Because after the Clearfield case in 1942, which was a US Supreme Court case, governance was in effect phased out and replaced by corporations masquerading as governance. And so corporations can only offer service contracts. So we have to give them our consent. We have to contract with them. Otherwise, they can do nothing. What they are masters of is manufacturing that consent and pretending that we owe them that consent. Like they'll send us a census and it says on the letter, you are required by law to complete this census. Well, that's gobbledygook. Who is you? What does required mean? If you look it up, it just means requested. What law are they referring to? And it's just nonsense. And then there's other things we could say. There's normally a window on the envelope, which means that it's mail fraud. When you put a window in an envelope, it's not properly addressed. Again, I haven't got time to go into that. But yes, we are deluded and tricked into giving our consent and subscribing to a kind of a contract. It's not a real contract, but it's called an adhesion contract. When a man or a woman are fooled into signing up under their person name. Yes, it was person is a mask. And so we're agreeing. And when you turn up in court, you're turning up wearing a mask, which they can because they're wearing masks too. So that it perpetuates the pantomime. So take the mask off, people, is my invitation. Take the mask off, go private, get back into your manhood, get back into your womanhood, respect your boys and girls, take them out of school because they're only going to be treated like children, and no good is going to come to them because as children, they are legal property, a property owned by the government, and the government has the right to use and abuse, which is why they are legally enforcing mask wearing, social distancing, track and tracing, and injecting children and saying, oh, now that your child is 12, it can legally give consent to being injected, even if you as a parent have said no. So it's all trick after trick after trick. And once we awaken to that, we can start to undo it for self and others. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just use some words there, pretending. They're pretending in so many ways to be doing things. You mentioned that people are fooled and tricked into doing things. And you mentioned a pantomime, and the whole scenario in which we're living really feels like a pantomime. And there are many ways in which the controllers attempt to gain our tacit approval or unspoken consent for what they're doing by utilizing dynamics like predictive programming, which I've got into big time in my books and talks, where they place depictions of real world events which are to come, because they're going to make them happen, in movies, TV shows, music videos, etc. And they seem to think this gets them off the karmic hook, because they placed the truth in plain sight and they told us what they were going to do, albeit in a coded, cryptic kind of way. But it doesn't work that way because our consent was not obtained voluntarily or consciously. They had to trick and fool us into doing it. And so that invalidates it. That is not real consent. Tricking somebody into consent by deception just doesn't cut it. And yet these deranged lunatic psychopaths don't seem to see it that way.
Yes, I agree. That's quite right. They are so desperate not to attract, in their eyes, heavy duty karma that they will clutch onto that straw. Well, yes, they consented. They signed. They rolled up their sleeves and stuck out their arms. So, well, if they're going to do that, we won't be responsible for the consequences. And legally, the Supreme Court has backed them up to some degree, saying that if you take an injection which genetically modifies you, the owner of the patent for that genetically modifying material, in effect, owns you. So legally, it means that they will not be responsible for murder or genocide. And so it will be kind of a mass suicide legally. But as you quite rightly say, Mark, it doesn't mean that they are spiritually and karmically off the hook by any means, because the universe is a bit smarter than they give it credit for.
Exactly. You wouldn't want to be them on the day that they meet their creator and answer for what they've done in this life. See ya, wouldn't want to be you.
Which is why they want to create artificial, which is basically why they want to hide inside machines, to hide from the creator.
Yeah, they got a shock coming, I think,
yeah.
in their hubris and arrogance. And I've noticed that they usually give us, the likes of us, an opportunity to opt out of their evil plans, because they know there will always be a few of us that can see it and don't buy the deception and will know what they're up to. So, for example, the face masks that everyone's wearing in stores and on public transport and stuff, if you choose not to wear one, you can simply state that you've got an exemption and they are required to leave you alone, in this country at least. So there's a way out. There's a, escape from this if you don't want to comply with the mask mandates. And there are ways out of other things as well. I don't know how that's going to work with vaccine passports if that becomes a reality, which I don't think they're going to be able to get away with that one. But there's usually, these ways to opt out. And that seems to be another way of them not coercing and forcing those of us that can see through the deception into doing something against our will. They give us the chance to stay outside of that. Have you kind of noticed that dynamic?
Absolutely. I mean, you don't have to switch on the television, but people do. You don't have to wear a mask, but people do. And as you say, there is an opt-out, there is an exception. You can, what I used to say when I was more strident, I'd just say, it's against the law to wear a mask, which it actually is. But now, to keep the peace, I just say, I cannot wear a mask. And they cannot ask me, according to their law, they cannot delve deeper into my reasons for not wearing a mask.
That's right. End of conversation at that point.
It is, and it without fail. So really, we're going back to the idea that this is an IQ test, and some people are failing it. They are so lazy-minded, and it all goes back to schooling. Schooling has undermined people's resilience, initiative, sense of self, intelligence, ability to question things. And so it's easy now for people to just say, oh, sod it, I'll just put a mask on for an easy life. And that's what it is. It's really 10, 20, 30 years on from school where the head teacher and the deputy head said, right, boys and girls, we're now going to do this and we're going to insist on that. And most boys and girls just said, well, righto, fair enough. And just the odd one said, well, I'm not standing for that, and just either walked out of school or just kicked off some kind of fuss. So it's up to the people like us to keep defying, in a peaceful, self-loving, non-compliant way, which is how I describe it, keep defying the so-called authority, making other people realize that, well, there is an alternative to the blue pill. And again, going back to the numbers game, when enough of us are routinely not complying and being seen not to keel over, dropping dead from some mythical virus, that maybe other people will start to follow suit. And in fact, I was in a taxi about a couple of months back. It's quite funny, actually. And I got in, it wasn't Uber, it was a private company. And the taxi driver was wearing his mask. And I said, could you do me a favor? Could you take your mask off? And he said, no, it's company policy for me to wear a mask. And I said, just hold on one doggone minute there, boy. I said, right now, am I not your employer? Because I'm going to be paying you at the end of this journey. He said, well, yes. I said, well, as your employer, I am commanding you to take your mask off. And he took it off in microseconds. It's just people don't realize that they think their employer is some invisible corporation that's organizing their taxi journeys, whereas in fact their employer is a man and a woman who's sitting behind them in the cab. So, there are all kinds of things that we can do. We can leverage the funds in our pockets to issue commands to conformists to say, no, stop right there, take your mask off. We can pull up their stickers and replace them with our own. We can do all kinds of things. We can, we can use little subtle tactics of subversion, inverting their reality and holding up a mirror to the insanity that they are living, but they're still stuck on finger number 9.
Yeah. And if that taxi driver had taken his mask off, who would know? It's just you and him in the car. How would it even get back to his employer?
He was so appreciative. He said, "Oh, you are my favorite customer. Thank you so much. You're like God's gift." I said, "All I did was ask you to take your mask off, mate."
Yeah. They've got this placing the truth in plain sight dynamic as well, which they seem to adhere to, as well as giving us a chance to opt out of things. They tend to put information out there for those that have the will to search for it, so that they can make the claim that we weren't in some way told. And I'm thinking of things like, it's in all walks of life. You buy a pack of cigarettes and there's a warning on it telling you it could kill you. You get some pharmaceutical meds from your doctor and there's a leaflet listing all the side effects or effects that could happen. And they're even doing it with vaccines. So you can get a list of the ingredients in the vaccine if you ask for it. There's probably loads of complicated chemical names, so you won't really know what they are. You won't realize that thimerosal is mercury and formaldehyde is called something else. But it's there if you want it, if the will is there to find out. And that seems to be another sort of spiritual dynamic that they adhere to, always giving us a chance to know what they're up to.
Yes, and to some extent, I have a little bit of empathy for that position, because it's complicated, because there's a lot of people who've had their brains deactivated. So on the one hand, yes, they have the opportunity to find the truth, but on the other hand, they're not looking because their brains have been sabotaged. So that's murky waters. And I think, as you hinted at before, I think these dark forces are simply papering over the cracks in their existence and hoping that the karma will go away, but it won't.
Yeah, I really feel and hope that's what's happening, papering over the cracks, putting a plaster on a broken leg, because the cat is out of the bag, as I mentioned in my last video, and it's not going back in. Too many people can see it now. So do you feel the dark controllers have overplayed their hand on this one? And they've just been too audacious, too arrogant. They've tried to fast track too many things too quickly, and it will be their downfall.
Absolutely. I think the pivotal moment, and I don't want to fly the flag of Trump and the Q movement, because that's still open to question.
Still waiting for those proofs on that one.
Yeah. But it was absolutely pivotal that Hillary, whatever you think about Donald Trump and whatever you believe he stands for, I do believe very, very firmly that it was absolutely pivotal that Hillary lost to him. And if she had won, the dark forces would have had an extra 4 years to implement this agenda, and it would have been more sophisticated, more relaxed, more insidious, more pernicious, and even the sharpest minds and the most alert truth-sayers would have had real difficulty in persuading anyone that anything untoward was happening. But when Trump got in, it really scuppered their plans, and they've had to accelerate it, because I think they anticipate him getting back in 2024, where he can reassert his position. And just very briefly, just to fly the Trump flag just briefly, while he was in, for those who are very Trump skeptical, while he was in, he didn't declare war on anyone. And that alone speaks volumes for the man. So it looks as though whatever he represents peace, and he stands for the people. Yes, he's got his own personal issues, and maybe he is biased in favor of certain sectors. Who knows? But the point is that he beat Hillary, and I think if Hillary had won, we would be looking at a much, much darker scenario, and a much more orchestrated, darker scenario than we're looking at now. What we're looking at now is shades of darkness, but also massive patches of light. And the light is beginning to shine through with eco movements and cooperative movements and freedom cells and rallies and talks and people going private, PMAs, private members associations, people realizing that the only way they're going to keep their businesses open is to step out of the public domain, off the sea, off the boats, off the ships, and back onto the land. And things have got so bad so quickly that it's woken so many. I mean, when you get riot police raiding a group of meditators, yogic meditators, then who you had warned, you meaning me, a few weeks earlier that trouble was ahead, and they were saying things like, "No, we just have meditation sessions. We're way off the police radar." And I said, "Don't count on that." And sure enough, a few weeks later, they got raided. So, but this insane activity on the part of the police is waking up people who used to be part of what you call the conscious movement, who used to believe that all you had to do was sit in a circle going "Om," and everything would be fine. But the insanity is such that even they are being raided, and so they're now part of the Truther movement. So the Truther movement and the conscious movement are coming together in a way that was unthinkable even a year ago. And so it's all good. I mean, there are some residual nonsense issues to deal with, but we're now a year on. We're much stronger. We're much more resilient, and we can take this insanity in our stride, like that good American psychiatrist has suggested.
Yeah. I mean, spiritual pursuits certainly have their value, and it's an important part of this experience, but real world action is also required. You do have to roll your sleeves up. You do have to get on the battlefield. You know, we've incarnated into human bodies and we have to use them in all their aspects. That's how I feel about it. So you've got a number of series developing on your YouTube channel, combating police tyranny, combating medical tyranny, etc. So are you continuing with these sort of themed videos?
Oh, I certainly am, Mark. There's a slight hold up because my collaborator, that's a very unfortunate word in this day and age, my associate, the woman that helps me make these videos, is very busy at the moment, and we won't resume for about another 2 or 3 weeks. But we're going to move on to schools and businesses specifically, although they are dealt with indirectly in other videos, traveling. So we'll have some more specific videos to deal with specific issues. And very much so. My immediate remit is to get out there and do talks, live talks, real life talks. You have to say that now, otherwise people think you mean live on Zoom. Real life, eyeball to eyeball talks, and so I'll be going zigzagging, figurating around the country, relentlessly. You know, I'm taking major multivitamins and minerals as we speak, so that I don't flag and fall over.
Yeah. Well, the travel freedom issue is one that I'll be personally interested in, because one of my major passions in life prior to this ridiculous scamdemic was traveling. I just used to love going overseas. I've been very fortunate. I was able through the DJing career to go to many different countries to play gigs. And since I've been doing this truthing lark, I've been booked to speak at conferences and meetup groups and stuff in different countries. And I loved all that. You know, I found it so therapeutic and just great for the spirit to go to all these different places and meet all these different people, see these different cities. And the idea of never being able to do that again absolutely horrifies me, because I will not bend to a vaccine passport. I will not obey quarantine rules. I will not conform with mask wearing and testing and tracing and stuff. So for me to ever travel internationally again, all that stuff is going to have to be gone. And I just dream of the day when it is.
Well, I have good news for you there, Mark, because I believe that there is remedy in the pipeline. I do a course which is basically a foundation course in privacy, trust, and universal rights. Now, I'm not flagging that course up right here, right now. What the reason I mention it is because people who do that course become eligible for an advanced course, which I don't actually run. But that advanced course is a course in trust, common law, private common law trust, express trust. And what you can do is create a trust of your assets and your business. And when you travel, you travel under that trust, and that trust is private. So you're not within the realm of the public. So you're traveling privately on trust business. And in the next few months, we will be perfecting that technology. So watch this space. My colleagues and associates are literally, as we speak, elaborating that course. And it will, in effect, be the advanced course for my course. But it's possible that they might invite people on directly who haven't done my course. We'll see. But so one of the remedies, there may well be other remedies, but certainly one remedy will be to create a private, irrevocable, express common law trust. That's a bit of a mouthful, and be traveling on private trust business. So that's one remedy in the pipeline.
That would only work then if airport officials were aware of this and all clued up on it. Otherwise, they would shut you down in the same way the average police officer on the street would try and shut you down if you tried to assert your rights in a way that they'd not been trained to recognize. So that might be a bit of a problem there.
It might be, but I think once you've got the paperwork in order, then you put their CEOs on notice and give them personal liability notices to go with your notice of traveling on a private trust business. Give them personal liability notices that they will personally be liable to indemnify you for any loss of expectation, of any loss of profit, of any loss of enjoyment of life, any loss of liberty or whatever, time lost. So I think the remedy has more teeth, more to it than meets the eye. So let's remain positive on that score for now anyway.
Okay. And just thinking about the police there, I remember hearing on one of your videos, you were differentiating between a policeman or a policewoman and a police officer. So they've done the same thing with the police as they have with the general public. They've kind of depersonalized them. They've stopped them being a man or a woman and made them an officer, which again is an entity outside of the living man or woman.
That's right. And the entity owes its primary fiduciary obligation. Fiduciary means pertaining to a trust. Fiduciary obligation to the stakeholder, which is the corporation, ultimately government, whereas the man has taken an oath, the police constable, the policeman, the policewoman has taken an oath, and their primary obligation is to uphold the law and keep the peace and protect the people. So these are two different animals. The policeman or woman is your friend, I'm simplifying now, is your friend, will protect you, is paid to protect you, and is your servant, a public servant. Whereas the policy enforcement officer is an agent of the government and is simply designed to enforce corporate policy rules. And there's a huge difference between the two. What confuses people, quite rightly, is that the same man, woman, or person can wear two different hats and they can switch. However, that said, you can normally tell if someone is wearing a tall sort of pointed hat, then that's the constable. And if they're wearing a checkered cap or a baseball cap, then they're definitely an officer. And in some cases, not just an officer, but of almost semi-military style police, basically looking for trouble. So you have to be able to spot the markers and operate accordingly. But you're quite right. They are two very, very different animals and have to be dealt with very differently. And that's what I go around. Well, it's no longer the subject of my talks because my talks are designed to simplify, uplift, and clarify. And so they're very much aimed at giving people a bigger picture of what's going on. If they want more detail, then they do the course, which is the Universal Rights and Privacy course. Yeah.
Sure. And there's more truths in the words there because police is obviously derived from policy because they're enforcing policy, and an officer is, beholden to the office that they work for. And I guess the word constable, con means together and stable means, stability. So I guess that's what that word breaks down to ultimately.
Yes, it's one word. I'm breaking them down as we go along. Yes, con. Well, con has another connotation, doesn't it? But yes, stable together. Today's word breakdown was release. When your car is released, you're leasing it, because the government own it and you only lease it. So when they impound it and then you get it released, because you pay the extortion charge for releasing it, so you're leasing it all over again. There's so many. The wordplay is never ending. It's just, you could do a 6-month course just on legalese wordplay.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. So you obviously get into a lot of subjects when it comes to self-empowerment and resisting tyranny, but is there one central, vital message that you would most like the people of this land and beyond to comprehend? Is there an overriding message that you'd really like to get through to people?
Yes, there is. And it's now the subject of my talks. And it's a very simple message. It comes in 2 parts, basically. And I think you were there the day that I first espoused it. Basically, you are the law. And it was a day in Birmingham when David Icke was there. You spoke, David Icke spoke. And
great day.
And then I crept on stage immediately after David Icke, and people thought I was there to take the platform down, and they thought, where's his screwdriver? But I said to the assembled, you are the law. Well, I said, we are the law. So we are the law. We, men, women, boys and girls, are a fractal version of the divine, and we are the law. And if we are complying with the one true universal principle, which is do no harm, then you remain above the law, and certainly above all man-made corporate rules. They're not really laws, they're rules. They can't be laws because there is only one law. If that law breaks down, the universe implodes and collapses in on itself and we're all gone. Well, at least we go somewhere else. But America, the US has got 60 million laws, allegedly. Well, they're just rules, corporate rules. So the takeaway from this is you are the law, and you are above the law if you are doing no harm. You are untouchable. I currently have a claim against me, or a prosecution against me, for holding a gathering of more than 30 persons on the fateful day back in November when I announced myself spontaneously as the people's lawyer. And in effect, I've put the Magistrates Court and the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, on notice that, in effect, they are not the law, but I am. And I've put them to prove that, or to ask how I have breached the law in any way. Not their silly rules, but the law. And so that's the takeaway. And the rest is getting past your own cognitive dissonance, your own schooling, because you weren't the law at school. You were subservient to the school rules. You weren't the law at home. You were subservient to your parents' rule. You may not even be the law in your own relationships because you might have a bossy, narcissistic spouse or partner. Your children might now be bossy and narcissistic. Who knows? So it's very, very, very easy for me to say you are the law and no one is above you at law. And we're all equal anyway at law. Men and women are all equal. So you've got to get past all these shadowy experiences of not appearing to have any power. But they are just illusions. They're delusions. That ultimately you are the power and authority in your own life. You can be tricked, you can be cajoled, you can be coerced, you can be bullied. Yes, but once you know who you are, then the bullying, the trickery, the deceit fizzles away. And if you stand up to a bully, guess what happens? They run away crying. And that is what will happen once you grow a pair, as they say, and stand up for yourself, because you are it.
Great message. So in terms of future plans, I know you've got many more YouTube videos to come, and you mentioned you're embarking on a speaking tour, going all over the place. Is there a website that people can go to find out where you're going to be, or are you on social media at all?
Yes, there's thepeopleslawyeruk.com, which has just recently gone live. Because bear in mind, The People's Lawyer has only been going about 5-6 months, and the website is only a few weeks old. So we've got thepeopleslawyeruk.com, all lowercase. It's got a live event section, which isn't yet populated because I'm literally in the process of putting up a map of where I will be in the coming months. But we'll populate it very soon. in the meantime, you can go on there and ask me where I'm going to be individually, and I'll tell you while I'm populating the map. There is the People's Lawyer Telegram channel, which is broadcast only. If you want to be part of a group, then you have to do the course and you get invited into the People's Lawyer Privacy Course Participants group. There's the YouTube channel, the People's Lawyer UK. I had to be UK because some American beat me to it, as they always do. There's videos coming out all the time. As I said, there is a breather while my associate is too busy. But I think I've covered everything. And if for people who are anxious to know more and to step up to the plate, they can do a privacy course, but you can access that course and contact me about it using the website.
Okay. Yeah, some American grabbed markdevlin.com as well. So I had to be djmarkdevlin.com. They always get there. Great conversation today. Great points made. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm sure we will meet up sometime very soon.
Oh, no doubt. Keep up the good work.
This is just a vibrations.
I'm picking up the vibrations.